now is that 100% be made in the U.S. Why don't we do that? Why don't we put more focus on made in the USA? It'll matter for us. It matters for our national pride on flags, to be sure, but it matters for our communities. It matters for our companies. It matters for our workers. Madam President, I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Certainly.
Further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Emily Boydston and Kevin Paulson of my staff be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's proceedings.
Without objection.
Madam President, I meant to be here earlier when Senator Rockefeller, I know, was on the floor speaking about the situation with the Federal Aviation Administration. However, I was unavoidably detained because I was chairing a hearing on the Help Committee that just adjourned a few minutes ago. But I wanted to be here to discuss with Senator Rockefeller the sad situation that we're facing right now with the shutdown of the Federal Aviation Administration. We're now in the sixth day of the defunding of the Federal Aviation Administration. And what that means is that I think right now we have some 4,000 FAA workers are furloughed. Tens of thousands of people are out of work in airport construction. Got it? Construction jobs, infrastructure. And these are people that are not working for the government. They're working for private contractors who have a contract with the FAA for runway construction, putting in lights, safety measures, things like that. So tens of thousands of people are out of work in the private sector because of the cutoff of FAA reimbursements to these businesses around the country. It's costing the federal government about $25 million in tax revenue a day. A day. A day. $25 million a day in lost tax revenue. That money would be plowed back into the economy to pay for aviation operations and for the people who are working out there on construction jobs in building new runways and lighting systems and things like that. So the time when, here we got so many people unemployed in our country. The unemployment rate really is about somewhere between 16 and 18%. It's not 9%, closer to 18%. Over 23 million people in America out of work. So what do the Republicans do? They hold up funding for the Federal Aviation Administration, which puts 4,000 more FAA people furloughed and, as I said, tens of thousands of people working on construction jobs around the country out of work. Now, why would the Republican members of this Congress do such a thing? Why? Because they want to overturn a National Mediation Board decision that was handed down a little over a year ago to align the election procedures under the National Railway Labor Act with the provisions that have always been in place under the National Labor Relations Act. Let me explain that. Under the National Labor Relations Act that's been in existence since the late 1930s, if you have an election to see whether or not workers want to organize a union or not, you count the yeas and you count the nays of those that vote. If the yeas are more than the nays, workers form a union. If the nays are more than the yeas, they don't form a union. under the National Railway Labor Act for years, an odd thing took place. Under that, it said that if you have an election for a union, you count the yeas, you count the nays. And then of all those people who didn't vote, you put them in the nay column. Interesting. If you don't vote, you're an automatic no. So what the National Mediation Board did a little over a year ago, they realigned this. And they said that from now on, under the rulemaking procedures, they said that from now on, you would only count the yeas and the nays. And you would not assign to one side or the other those who didn't vote. Now, to most of us, that just seems to make plain old common sense. After all, in a school board election, in your local school board elections, we know that the outcome is pretty low. School board elections usually turn out maybe, what, 20% of the electorate, if that, maybe less than that. Yet I submit there's probably no more important elections in America today than school board elections, but I won't get into that right now. So what if we said in all these school board elections, take the yeas, and then all these people that didn't vote, they're in no's? Or what if we did that in Senate races? Huh? How about taking a Senate race? That kind of strikes home to people around here. Let's say a senator's running for re-election. And let's say you have the turnout. If you're lucky, you get a 60% turnout of voters. So that means that people who don't vote no on the incumbent? Is that what we want to see? If you don't vote, that means it's a no vote on your re-election. Well, most people would think that's inherently unfair. And it is inherently unfair. The same is true in elections, whether or not workers want to form a union or not. I mean, there's a lot of reasons people don't vote in any election. You know, maybe they're sick or they're ill, they don't vote. Maybe they can't make up their mind one way or the other. Maybe they say, well, I see this side and I see that side and I can't make up my mind, I'm just not going to vote. And some people say, I don't care which side wins. I'm disinterested in this election. And thankfully in America, we don't have somebody saying, forcing somebody to vote. So it makes common sense that if you don't vote, you shouldn't be counted on one side or the other. So, the National Mediation Board put this rule in place. They went through all the hearings, comment period. They did all the stuff necessary to pass a rule. And then it was brought up here in the Senate within the last year. It was brought up here in the Senate under a procedure called the Congressional Review Act, if I'm not mistaken, wherein there is an expedited procedure for the Senate to take up and vote on a regulation as to whether or not we want to overturn it or not. It's an expedited procedure. It's an up or down vote. And so that was brought up here, and as the chairman of the committee that has jurisdiction over labor, I debated it with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. It was a fairly good debate, I thought, and we voted. And the Senate voted not to overturn that regulation. Well, you'd think that would be the end of it, okay? No, you'd be wrong. What's that got to do with the FAA? Because the Republicans in the House and some in the Senate are saying that they are not going to let this FAA reauthorization bill get through unless and until we overturn the decision, this rule of the National Mediation Board, which basically says if you don't vote in this election, you're not counted on one side or the other. They're holding the FAA hostage. 4,000 workers furloughed, tens of thousands in airport construction out of work, $25 million a day being lost in revenue that would be taken in so that we could put these people back to work. All because they want to make it harder for workers to form a union. Well, think about it this way. We're going to have a presidential election next year. Let's say all the people who don't vote would be tallied as a no vote for the incumbent president, assuming he runs for re-election. Now, some of my Republican friends would probably like that. I understand that. But do you think the American people would think that's fair? That if you don't vote, you're counted as a no vote? A federal district court, they've taken this to court, has also rejected a legal challenge to these new rules, finding that the agency, the National Mediation Board, was acting well within its legal authority in modernizing the elections systems. Well, we see this time and time again. It's happening now in this Congress. Whenever we try to make things more fair or to use a legitimate procedure to address something that I think most people would think would be unfair, that is counting no votes or counting someone who didn't vote as a no vote. Whenever we do that, the Republicans always try to find an end run, some way to undo that. I don't know why it is that we're down to, what, less than 10% of our labor force is now unionized. To my friends on the other side of the aisle, they will not be happy until there are no more unions in America. They will not be happy until unionization is less than 1%, and then only a company-sponsored union, not an independent union. Well, we saw the same thing right now. Republicans are voting to change the law in the middle of a trial as a special favor to the Boeing company. Boeing was accused of retaliating against its workers for going on strike. As I have pointed out in numerous talks on the floor here, that there is a process, a judicial process, that has been used both by labor and management for the last 60-some years to settle disputes. And that process has been to go to the NLRB. Business has done this as well as management has done this as well as labor, to ask the NLRB to find that a certain thing was wrong or that unions overstepped their bounds. Unions come in and say management overstepped its bounds. NLRB takes this, looks at it, tries to mediate, get the two sides to agree. But if they can't, a process is set in motion whereby the general counsel, who, by the way, was a career person, not a political appointee, as some have said, then begins an investigation to see whether or not the facts as presented warrant the next step, and that is going to an administrative law judge. That's what's happened in this Boeing case. Now, I've heard all this nonsense about they're trying to take jobs out of South Carolina. They're trying to destroy right-to-work states. That's nonsense. All it is going to an administrative law judge with fact-finding to see whether or not Boeing actually retaliated against its employees for their exercising a legal right. Their legal right being the right to organize and bargain collectively as a union. Did Boeing retaliate against them for doing that? I don't know. My Republican friends seem to think they know. But it should go through the process of the administrative law judge. That finding can be appealed by either side, management or labor. Goes to the NLRB. They make a decision. That can be appealed to the appeals court, federal appeals court, circuit court. That decision can be appealed to the Supreme Court. Yet the Republicans want to interfere in that process and make it a political decision as to whether or not this case should go forward. Well, just as they are wrong to try to change the rules in the middle of a case going forward to benefit Boeing, what's happening now is also wrong in what they're trying to do to interfere in the reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration, to change the rule by the National Mediation Board. One of my colleagues the other day was talking about when are we going to stop doing favors to the union bosses or to big unions or something like that. I never thought that the National Mediation Board was a favor to a union. I always looked upon it as a fair decision, a regulation, to make it in line with the National Labor Relations Act. Why should we have two separate kinds of election procedures for forming a union in this country? And I think most people would say, take it to the American, just common sense. Should someone who doesn't vote be counted as a no vote? As I said, we don't do that in the National Labor Relations Act. So we've always had this kind of anomaly for years, and we finally tried to get it straightened out. And that's what's costing us. That's what's costing us these jobs and $25 million a day. Now, there's another issue that they have brought up, and that's the essential air service, the number of small airports. We can debate that. We can talk about that. Essential air service to small airports. To eliminate it, the bill would eliminate it. It's about $16 million a year. $16 million a year that it would save. Yet, every week that they hold up the FAA reauthorization, it's costing the federal government some $150 million a week in uncollected taxes to support our airports. So in order to save $16 million a year, they're willing to cost the government $150 million a week. Boy, that's some kind of economics on the part of my Republican friends. So strictly from a budget perspective, the House's obstructionism is not just absurd, it's grossly counterproductive. So again, Madam President, this is really, again, uncalled for, what they are doing to hold up the FAA reauthorization. As I said, we're now going to the 6th day, and it's going to have an effect on air travel. It hasn't yet. It hasn't yet, but it is going to have a profound effect on air travel the longer this plays out. So I asked the House Republican leadership to get off of this obstructionism. Get off of this. And let's deal forthrightly on the bill before us, which is the FAA reauthorization, and quit trying to overturn this rule of the National Mediation Board. And on essential air service, I think there's probably some compromises that can be made. There are some adjustments and modifications that can be made. I think that's probably so. And that we had to work I think, in goodwill towards doing that on the longer-term bill. But it's not right to hold up the FAA reauthorization right now on either the essential air service objections or they're trying to overturn the decision of the National Mediation Board. So again, Madam President, I want to thank Senator Rockefeller for his leadership on this issue and for his vigorous opposition to the House Republicans' effort both to eliminate totally essential air service and to try to do a backdoor, an end run around the National Mediation Board's decision, or rule, on providing for fair elections for those who seek to belong and to form a union in the airline or railway industry. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
Let me begin by applauding Senator Harkin, my colleague from Iowa, for his comments relative to the FAA and the need to put the people who are out of work back to work and to get the FAA reauthorization done. It's been way too long. We have a number of people who staff the tower that deals with air traffic coming into the United States north of Boston. That tower's in New Hampshire. We have people out of work. We need to get them back to work, and we need to see this legislation done and moving forward. Madam President, I have 11 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I came to the floor this afternoon because the United States government is now less than a week away from defaulting on its obligations for the first time in our history. As we've heard from economists and business leaders across the country, a default could result in hundreds of thousands of lost jobs and in higher interest rates for every American. And yet, we're still debating whether or not we should avoid default. It is a very dangerous game, and we are risking permanent harm to the American economy. I want to just examine one consequence of default for a minute. All three credit rating agencies, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, have said that a default would automatically result in a lower credit rating for the U.S. government. And I think we all understand the principle of credit rating. It's like the credit scores on record for most of us in our personal lives. The better we've been about paying our debts in the past, the better our credit score. When we go to buy a house or a car, when we ask for a loan, the bank looks at that credit score and decides how much interest to charge us. The worse we've been at paying our debts in the past, the lower our score and the more money we pay in interest. Well, the credit rating agencies are keeping a credit score on the United States government. So far, it's been perfect. The U.S. has never failed to pay our debts. That's why we have the lowest interest rates in the world, and loaning money to the U.S. government is considered the world's safest investment. With the default, that would all change. And here's the key. It would change in just minutes, and that change would last for generations. If we default, the credit rating agencies will lower our credit rating immediately. I recently had a conversation with Martin Regalia, the chief economist of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In that conversation, he said that the market reaction to a default would take nanoseconds. Once we've defaulted, we can never unring that bell. Our special status as the world's safest investment may never return. We will have increased our interest rates for decades to come and maybe even longer. J.P. Morgan Chase said this week that a lower credit rating could cost our government $100 billion a year in interest. And this is the worst kind of wasteful spending, because that money wouldn't be going to investments in our economy or to secure a better future for our children. It would go to nothing. It would do nothing. It would just be money down the drain. Now, we have a path forward. It's the plan that's recently been proposed by Senator Reid. There are a lot of things about this plan that I don't like. I'm concerned because I don't think it takes a balanced approach towards deficit reduction that I've long called for, and I'm disappointed that it lacks the $4 trillion in deficit reduction that we need. But I'm ready to support it. And because all of the cuts in this bill are cuts that Republicans have already supported, they should be prepared to support this plan too. The Reid plan would cut at least $2 trillion off of our debt while allowing us to avoid default through the end of next year. These two elements are crucial to avoid the lower credit rating that we've been hearing concerns raised about. We need to provide the markets with some long-term certainty that will avoid default, some proof that we can deal seriously with our long-term deficits and debt. A short-term, 6-month increase, as proposed in the House, would just kick the can down the road. It won't prevent a lower credit rating. We need to end this constant threat of default, which is paralyzing our government and our economy. The Reid plan achieves this through a combination of cuts to our domestic spending, reduced spending on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and through targeted cuts to mandatory spending. It doesn't raise taxes, and it doesn't touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security. Again, this is not a perfect plan. I've been on the floor many times in favor of a balanced package that includes cuts to spending, domestic, defense, and mandatory, but also includes increased revenues. The Reid plan doesn't achieve those goals, but I do have hope that we'll get there eventually. This is not a proposal that I would have written, but I'm one of 100 members of the Senate and one of 535 members of Congress. And I don't get everything I want. None of us here in Congress get everything we want. That's the nature of compromise. That's the nature of democracy. And that's why the framers of the Constitution created checks and balances in government. That's why they created 2 chambers in Congress and 3 branches of government. And when you're a leader in government, you just don't have the luxury of drawing a line in the sand and walking away. You've got to be prepared to stay at the table and to give something up. I've just laid out what I believe many of my colleagues are willing to give up in this proposal, our demand for a comprehensive, balanced plan to reduce the deficit. In exchange, I'm willing to accept a plan that includes more cuts than any other plan on the table. And these are cuts that 40 of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have already supported. This is a plan that I think neither side is going to love, but both sides should be able to accept. It's a plan that gets the job done. Now, we here in the Senate and in Congress have to get the job done. So I urge that we come to the table, we adopt a compromise, and we put this debt ceiling vote behind us. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Madam President,
The Majority Leader.
we are not in a quorum call.
Correct.
It's a rare occasion. Mr. President, today the House of Representatives will vote on Speaker Boehner's short-term plan to raise the debt ceiling. As soon as the House completes its vote tonight or this afternoon, the Senate will move to take up that message that they sent to us. It will be defeated. They know that. The American people now should understand that clearly. No Democrat will vote for a short-term Band-Aid approach that would put our economy at risk and put the nation back in the untenable situation that we are in today, just a few short months from now. Economists have said that a short-term arrangement holds many of the same risks as a technical default. Democrats are not willing to put our economy on the line on something like that. It's just something we cannot do for the good of the country. Our economy and the financial markets desperately need stability. Speaker Boehner's bill does not provide either. It does not provide stability, and it certainly doesn't help our economy in any way. So I believe, Madam President, it's time for the Tea Party Republicans to stop resisting compromise. They must join Democrats and Republicans of goodwill to put the economy ahead of politics.
Madam President.
The senator from New York.
Thank you, Madam President. And I would just like to underscore what the leader has said. The bottom line is very simple. Speaker Boehner is busy twisting arms right now to try and get his bill passed through the House. But it's a futile gesture, because that bill is not going to pass the Senate. We've made that clear in the letter that 53 of us signed yesterday, and nothing has changed. The idea that we will take Boehner's bill and pass it, or take Boehner's bill and tweak it and pass it, is not what is going to happen. And so we would urge Speaker Boehner and all of our Republican colleagues to sit down and negotiate. Throwing a hot potato over to us that won't pass just delays things a day, and we are simply 4 days away from one of the worst financial catastrophes that could face this country, namely, for the first time in our 230-year history, a refusal to pay the debt. And that means that the time for these kinds of political games and political posturing is over. Speaker Boehner's having a rough time getting the votes over there, but my guess is he will. But it won't make a darn bit of difference. It won't make a darn bit of difference because it's not going to pass this House, the Senate. It will not pass because a short-term extension risks the same things that no extension risks: a downgrade, a lack of confidence in the markets, and gridlock. We've seen gridlock up to now. 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, the same gridlock will occur. We cannot play with this kind of risky fire. So our plea to the Speaker is stop continuing to throw pieces of red meat after red meat after red meat, piece after piece after piece of red meat to that right-wing lion in your caucus. Start taming the lion. That's what you have to do, because otherwise that lion will devour you and devour the economy of our country. The kind of narrow ideological approach that we have seen in the House will not get us anywhere. And the shame of it all is that not every member of the House, and I don't believe the Speaker, has that ideology, the sort of my way or no way ideology, the no compromise ideology. And it's time to break free. It's time to do what's good for the country. A short-term solution will not work. The leader has just made it clear that as soon as the House passes its bill, it will be defeated here in the Senate. Let's not waste 5, 6, 7, 8 more hours. Let's start negotiating something that will save this country from potential financial catastrophe now.
Would the senator yield for a question?
Be happy to yield to my friend from Iowa.
I thank the senator from New York for his very lucid remarks and for his great leadership in trying to get through this mess that we're in. You know, I say to my friend, a lot of people in the country are looking and they're thinking that this is some kind of a food fight. Somehow that everybody's to blame for this here in Washington. I asked my friend, the senator from New York, isn't it true that there are some 50 members of the Republican caucus in the House who have said forthrightly that they will not vote to raise the debt ceiling under any circumstance? One of those, of course, being Representative Bachmann, who is seeking the presidential nomination on their ticket, said she would not vote to raise it under any circumstance, any circumstance. Does the senator know of any one Democrat, either in the House or the Senate, who has said they would not vote to raise the debt ceiling under any circumstance? I asked the senator, is there one? I've not been able to find one.
I thank my colleague from Iowa for the question. I concur in his findings. I haven't found one either. Democrats know. We have different views on this side of the aisle. And many of us would write deficit reduction bills differently than some others of us would. But we realize that to let the debt ceiling lapse would be a disaster, to not raise it. And so I have not heard of a single Democrat who has said the debt ceiling ought to lapse. And I've heard scores of Republicans, elected official Republicans, and thousands of others and groups in that right-wing firmament pushing their members to let this debt ceiling lapse. My guess, if God forbid it happens, and we're doing everything we can to prevent it from happening, they will retract that language, or they will find ways to explain what they really meant, because their analysis that it doesn't matter or it won't do much harm is unfortunately dead wrong.
I thank
the
Senator would yield for another question. Again, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I sympathize with this among the general populace, that somehow raising the debt ceiling means that somehow we can go and borrow more money in the future and go further in debt. Isn't it true that raising the debt ceiling just simply means that we're going to pay for what so many of us, Republicans and Democrats, have voted in the past to appropriate money for? It's like using your credit card. I asked my friend, it's like using your credit card. You go out and buy something, and now you say, but I don't want to pay the bill. I think that kind of puts it in terms that the average American can understand. If you've used your credit card and you've run up a debt, you've got to pay the bills. Otherwise, your credit is going to go down, and you're going to lose your credit card. You're not going to be able to do anything else. Isn't that sort of what we're confronting here? Is that Republicans and Democrats in the past, we all share the blame perhaps for having deficits, and we can go into the causes of that. I don't mean to do that here. But the fact is, the United States of America has an obligation to pay its bills. And the Republicans say, no, they don't want to pay the bills. Doesn't that sort of strike the average American as saying, wait a minute, no, we have to honor our debts. We have always honored our debts in this country since the Revolutionary War. Is that not the fact?
That is absolutely the fact. My colleague from Iowa is exactly correct. The bottom line is, yes, these are what we're talking about with the debt ceiling is debts we've already incurred. No American family has the luxury, once they sign up for a mortgage, to tell the bank, well, I'm not going to pay you unless you do ABC. No American family has the luxury of telling the credit card company, hey, unless you buy me a year's supply of groceries, I'm not going to pay my credit card debt. Once you incur the debt, you have an obligation to pay. That is one of the foundations of American life. It's been that foundation since Alexander Hamilton argued with Thomas Jefferson. And it served our country well. The awful example that it would set if America, this great land, this federal government, said, well, I'm not going to pay the debt. We're not going to pay the debt unless A, B, C, D is done. What kind of example does that set to American families, to American young people? Mm-hmm. It's the opposite, frankly, of the conservative philosophy, part of which I agree with in this regard, that you pay your bills, that you pay your debts, and if you don't, you have there's a consequence. So it is just amazing. This is the first time, I believe, you can check the history books, in American history, where a large group in either house of this Congress has made it a campaign not to pay the debt unless they get their way on certain other issues, whatever they be. And if every one of us did that, this country would be paralyzed. We wouldn't be able to do a thing. It is leading down a road that nobody should want to travel on. I yield.
Mr. Senator, I'd like to ask one more question, and I will yield. Isn't it true that I'd say that Senator from New York has been a leader in this, and so many others here, that look, we want to first of all pay our bills, but then we want to get our deficit under control and reduce our debt. And to that end, we have, I think, on the Democratic side, I would say, we have tried to propose a balanced approach. A balanced approach, I asked my friend from New York, who's been a leader in this area, of both cutting spending and also raising revenue, so that we're kind of all in this together. We're asking everyone. We're not willing just to cut the deficit on the backs of the poor or people who are out of work, the elderly on Medicare. We're saying everybody got to take a little bit, but we're also going to ask some sacrifice for those who have much in our society. That we want to raise some revenues from those who have benefited in the last 10, 15 years so much and have gotten so much wealth in our society. We're asking for them also to share in this. We have proposed that, have we not? I asked the Senator. And has it not been true that the Republican side has been unwilling to ask the richest people in our country to help us reduce the deficit? They will not agree to any revenues. I asked my friend from New York, is that not the
again, my colleague from Iowa is on the money. There needs to be balance. The President has stressed this. I think everyone on our side has stressed this. We do have a serious deficit problem and a serious debt problem. We have to deal with it. I think there's agreement in this chamber. And I'll give some credit to those on the other side of the aisle who made this their signature issue and influencing policy. But if you're going to have to do that and do belt-tightening, shouldn't it be across the board? And here's the fact of the matter. If you're a middle-class person, it's hard to pay for college. It's hard to pay for, say, prescription drugs. It's hard to take that paycheck and make sure it deals with all the needs that you and your spouse and your children have. And over the years, we've established ways that the government helps with student loans or with prescription drug programs, other kinds of help. It so happens that the wealthy among us, God bless them, they don't need a student loan. They have plenty of money to pay for their children's college. They don't need a prescription drug plan. Even with the high expense of these prescription drugs, they can afford it. God bless them. The way the wealthy benefit from the tax code, because they have a lot of money, is there are tax expenditures, tax breaks that they get. They think they're important. I understand that. But they're no more important than helping young people go to college or helping our elderly, average folks pay for their prescription drugs. And if you're going to be across the board and you're going to say no revenues, you're going to have an unbalanced and unfair approach. And let me say this. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have tried to scare people. This has not happened just this year, but for many years. They say Democrats want to raise your taxes. That is not the case if you are an average middle-class American. In fact, the President has made it a watchword, and we have religiously concurred and followed, that no one who makes below $250,000 a year should get any tax increase. That's 97% of all America. So when we say we want revenues, we're talking about two things. We're talking about tax breaks, tax loopholes for the very wealthy, whether they be individuals or corporations. And we are talking about tax breaks for the wealthiest among us, who under the previous administration got much greater breaks than anybody else. And that is all we are talking about. So I would ask my colleagues, I would ask the American people to understand that. Don't be scared when somebody gets up and says they want to raise taxes, that it means your taxes. It doesn't unless, God bless you, you have a whole lot of money or you're a corporation with a very nice little break that may not be as necessary as, say, helping middle-class students go to helping the elderly get life-saving prescription drugs. So there has to be balance. Now, I know my good colleague from Iowa, who has spent his lifetime creating government programs that help people, it pains him when he hears there has to be spending cuts in those programs. But I have never heard him say, if there are any spending cuts, I'm not going to vote for deficit reduction. But the mirror image on this side says, I will not vote for any bill if it even has one plug nickel of revenues. And that is not fair, that is not right, that is not balanced, and it is totally against what just about every American believes, including a majority of Republicans. So that's why we're here making this fight. And I'd say one other thing in reference to my colleague's question. It is unfair when the commentators and the people say, well, on the one hand, the Democrats aren't compromising, and on the other hand, the Republicans aren't compromising. I understand that we should always not just look at our own position and try to understand somebody else's position. That's the way it works around here. Otherwise, we'd have a dictator, a benevolent dictator. We don't. But when we are willing to give on spending cuts, serious spending cuts that we don't like, and the other side says they're not willing to give a nickel on revenues, it's not each side is failing to give. It's not that each side is compromising about equally. It's not that each side has walked about the same distance to come up with a compromise. In this case, it's not true every time. They have been unwilling, my Republican friends have been unwilling to compromise one jot. And we have been willing to do things very painful to us. So I would say to my friends who comment and write about this, be fair. Let the public know who is willing to move away from their hardline position for the sake of compromise, for the sake of renewing the debt ceiling, for the sake of getting our large debt and deficit down, and who has refused to budge. I think the answer is pretty obvious. I yield the floor.
The senator from Colorado.
Mr. President, thank you, and I'd like to thank the senator from Alaska for allowing me to jump ahead in the queue. I'm going to have a word or two to say about the issues that were raised by the senators from Iowa and New York at the end, but I'm rising today to talk about an issue that's actually separate. I've been out here on the floor week after week talking about the debt limit and the debt reduction negotiations, but today I wanted to talk about another absurd and needless Washington-inflicted, what I can only think of as a mistake, and that is the partial shutdown of the FAA. This shutdown, while buried in the headlines, is affecting Colorado jobs and the economy across the United States, Mr. President. Unable to walk and chew gum at the same time, Congress's inability to resolve this impasse has caused the furloughing of thousands of workers nationwide and put at risk several very important summer construction projects at our airports in Colorado. Earlier this year, the Senate worked together to pass a long-term FAA reauthorization bill. This important bill, which I supported, will modernize our nation's air transportation system and reduce frustrating and costly delays. The American people would be astonished to learn how antiquated our system is right now. But the House and Senate Conference Committee have been unable to finalize the bill. Last Friday, Congress failed to pass a short-term authorization measure to buy negotiators more time, and now certain FAA functions have been shut down. This shutdown makes absolutely no sense to the people in Colorado who rely on this industry for their livelihoods, their business, and travel. And I know the same is true in Alaska. But it's more than that, Mr. President. Colorado has a short summer construction season, probably not as short as Alaska's, but nevertheless short, and many airports set aside the summer months to complete much-needed improvement projects. So this shutdown has come at the worst time for them. At the Loveland Fort Collins Airport in Colorado, they're very near canceling a planned runway improvement project. Loveland Fort Collins is a one-runway airport. Officials had already canceled summer flights to accommodate a $7 million runway rebuilding project. Now they could be forced to shelve the project, which was bringing around 150 jobs to the area. At Pueblo Memorial Airport, by the way, again, keep in mind, this is about Washington's dysfunction. There aren't big policy debates here. Washington turning its back on the rest of the country once again. At Pueblo Memorial Airport, officials have said that they may be forced to delay a $12 million runway rebuilding project. At the Durango Airport, officials are concerned that an ongoing $3 million apron rehabilitation project, which currently employs 30 Coloradans, will receive a stop work order next week if Congress fails to act. And at the Denver International Airport, one of the crown jewels in this country, officials are concerned that the shutdown will affect scheduled concrete and asphalt work on a runway and maintenance on passenger loading bridges. These delays could affect the overall safety of Colorado airports, and they are affecting jobs right now. Nationwide, an estimated 3,500 FAA workers began to be furloughed this past Saturday. 27 of these workers are in Colorado. They were either sent home or forced to work without pay. To his great credit, Chairman Rockefeller has recently introduced legislation that would allow the FAA to continue to pay those workers even during the shutdown. I've co-sponsored that legislation. I hope the Senate considers to do it today. But we need to do more than that. We've been asked to do more than the bare minimum by our constituents. You know, we've gotten to the point around here where just keeping the lights on somehow is a success. That's a pretty low bar. It's a low bar to Heather Hilgers of Englewood, Colorado. She's an engineer. Airports hire her to complete construction projects so they can meet FAA safety standards. She wrote to my office, quote, "Next week, if there's no one to reimburse the contractor, the job has to stop. The stall is affecting engineering contracts. A visible impact would be the construction contractor's jobs." Andrew Vogt of Denver, Colorado, is also an engineer. He wrote, quote, "It's a frustrating experience that his whole industry has gone through. We are hoping a long-term solution, can be achieved in short order. As a professional engineer, certified construction manager for airport improvement projects, there is literally no work to do this year. Put me back to work," he said. Jeff Campbell, also of Englewood, Colorado, is an aviation. These are not government employees, by the way. We're talking about private sector employees whose jobs and expectations and salaries and plans for their families are being put on hold by the games that are being played here in Washington. Jeff Campbell, also of Englewood, Colorado, is an aviation engineer who's involved with 5 projects that are being affected by the shutdown. One is the failing runway at Fort Collins, Loveland. He said 150 people expecting to begin work next week are about to be put on hold, and the project will have to be rebid for the 3rd time. Mr. President, a lot of people in Congress talk about putting people back to work. They talk about fiscal responsibility. But this delay is costing thousands of jobs and an estimated $30 million a day in lost revenue. If this shutdown continues, these losses could dwarf the entire yearly budget of the EAS program, which some claim is holding up the bill. Congress must not allow our debate over the debt limit and our deficit to prevent action on a short-term FAA extension. Such inaction only proves once again to the American people how broken this place is. Mr. President, it would be a terrible shame for members of Congress to resolve this debt debate, adjourn, and board their planes home for recess without resolving this issue. What a slap in the face to people all across this country. And on behalf of our constituents who make a much more forceful case than I ever could. I implore my colleagues and members of the House to resolve this impasse and reauthorize FAA now. And with the indulgence of the Senator from Alaska, I just want to take the opportunity to say a word or two about this debt limit discussion that we're having right now. You know, we face enormous challenges in our country right now. Our economy is almost producing what it was producing before we went into this terrible recession. But we've got 14 million people that are unemployed. The great productive American economy has figured out how to produce what it was producing before with fewer people, but we haven't figured out how to put people back to work. My own view is that we need to look hard at our tax code, our regulatory code, and other things to make sure we're inspiring innovation and job growth here in the United States, so we're not just shipping it overseas and saying it's too bad for everybody that's here. We are at the end of a decade when median family income has declined for the first time in our country's history. It's never happened before. Cost of health care has gone up. Cost of higher education has gone up. It's harder and harder and harder for the middle class in this country to survive. If you're a child living in poverty in the United States, your chances of getting a college education are 9 in 100. In the 21st century, in the greatest country in the world. And there are countries all over this globe that sense weakness, that are trying to outcompete us, trying to out-educate us, trying to out-invest in their infrastructure while we play foolish political games. They're not waiting for permission from us to outcompete us. And you know, one of the single greatest assets this country has had since almost its founding has been our bulletproof credit rating, has been the fortress that is our full faith and credit of the United States. Financial transactions all over the globe spanning decades, hundreds, centuries, have been financed based on the strength of our credit, the full faith and credit of the United States. And generation after generation of politicians have done everything they could to protect it. Just as any mayor in my state, just as any superintendent of schools in my state would do anything to make sure they protected the credit rating of their city or of their school district. And now we face, for the first time in our country's history, a threat of downgrade, a threat that our interest rates would spike. And that's not a political observation. That's coming from the credit rating agencies. They're not politicians. And what the math tells us is that every 1% increase in our cost of borrowing adds $1.3 trillion, $1.3 trillion to our debt over the next 10 years, making the problems that we face today even harder to solve. The President knows that I've supported for a long time a comprehensive approach to this, one that would actually make a meaningful difference to our debt and to our deficit, and I will continue to fight for it, as I know the Senator from Alaska will. But it's time for Washington to move past these political games and reassure our capital markets that we're not going to be the first generation of senators to blow up our credit rating over politics, to reduce the full faith of and credit of the United States to rubble for politics. I don't want to be somebody who 30 years from now or 40 years from now somebody comes and says, hey, we detect that you were once in the United States Senate. You were one of 100 people here. When we compromise one of the greatest assets that this country has. So I would implore the leadership of both parties, both here and in the House, to work this out, and then let's get on with the tough discussion that we have to have about our debt and deficit. Mr. President, I thank again the Senator from Alaska for allowing me to speak ahead of him and also for his leadership throughout this entire debate. He, like a number of us, have been working hard with members across the aisle to try to get a bipartisan solution that's balanced, that makes sense heading toward the future, and I thank him for his leadership, and I yield the floor.
Thank you very much.